the country Malta. Very interesting enough. We've been exploring different countries. We just spoke about Kosovo quite recently, and we're going to concentrate on Malta here today. The history of the Jews in Malta spans 2 millennia. A Jewish community is attested on islands by, let's say, the 4th and 5th century. Jews prospered in Malta under Arab and Norman rule. They were expelled in the year 1492, and a community could only be re-established after 1798 under British rule. In the 19th and 20th century, the Jewish community in Malta welcomed refugees from Italy, Central Europe, escaping Nazi rule. I think current day, a small community remains, to say, well established on the islands over here. Now, we can find out more information within regards to Malta itself. I think it was in the year 1285, the Jewish mystic, great Rabbi Abram Abu Lafia, he happened to be from Zaragoza, Rabbi was talking about on this series. After being expelled from the Jewish community of Palermo, he retired to live his last years in solitude in Comenia. What is this? Where he taught and perhaps wrote the famous book Imre Shefer, Words of Beauty, or also the Sefer Ha'ot, the Book of the Sign. In I think 2003, the presumed remains of Rabbi Abu Lafia and of other Jewish Maltese of the 1st century were symbolically reburied in the Jewish cemetery of Marsa. It's actually interesting. Another tidbit is in medieval Medina, I think the Jewish quarter, Il Giudico, which I think was a street along the north side of the Cathedral of the Assumption of Gozo, which Jews paid a special tax to the town's università, being granted in exchange a monopoly on the apocaris and the dyers. In 1419 to 1420, it's reported over a register of male adults in Malta, excluding Birju and Gozo. The column in La Guardia of the Jewish quarter of Medina lists 57 conscripted Jewish men. This leads to an estimate of about 350 Jews in Malta at that point in time. I think they typically had surnames as Meir or Melch or Nefus or Levi or Cataluna and other last names. I think in 1479, we're going through Maltese Jewish history over here in this special edition. Malta and Sicily came under the Aragonese rule, and come with, I think it was the year 1492, the Alhambra decree by the Catholic monarchs forced all Jews to leave Spanish territory because they made up, let's say at that point in time, they would make up, I believe, such a large portion of the island's population. The Spanish crown forced them even to pay compensation for the tax losses, let's just say, caused by, at that stage in time, you see I think it was caused by their own expulsion, which is absolute madness and anti-Semitism without doubt at the highest level. It's not clear where the Jews of Malta went, but they may have joined the Sicilian community in the Levant at that point in time. It is also likely that several dozen Maltese Jews converted to Christianity to remain in the country, as did many Sicilian Jews at that point in time. You can see the horrific anti-Semitism. Come with the year 1530, Charles, I think the Fifth, the Holy Roman Emperor, gave Malta to the Knights Hospitaller, who ruled the island until the year 1798, so that spanned for a huge amount of time. Now, during these 3 centuries, the islands had no free Jewish population. Those Sicilian conversos who had moved to Malta, attracted by the Knights' liberal policy towards the Jews of Rhodes, had to continue practicing their religion in secrecy. Malta was frequently mentioned for its large enslaved Jewish population in Jewish literature of that period. I believe it happened to have been the Knights would capture Jews and Muslims during corsairing, let's just say, raids against Ottoman merchant ships and coastal towns, and keep them hostage in the bagnos, the prisons of Birgu, Valletta and Sanglia, to extort ransom. It would also be up to Jewish societies with the redemption of the captives to raise such amounts from Jewish communities across Europe. Now, I think the majority is reported over of contemporary Maltese Jewish community originates in Jewish immigration from England, from Gibraltar, North Africa, Portugal and Turkey. I think this was during the short period of the French rule between the years 1798 to 1800 and British rule after that. I think it was from the year 1805, I think it was. Jews were targets of campaign at that point in time by the Maltese directed against the foreigners at that stage in time, which is highly reported over. I recommend everyone to look more into that. Now, friends, anyone that is tuning in at the moment, we are exploring the life, the history of the Maltese Jewish community and the history behind them here on the special edition of here. Now, the first Jewish families to move to Malta, I believe, were the Abiasis from Gibraltar, and the Borges de Silva from Portugal. The teacher Abraham A. Correa arrived in Malta from England in the year 1809, becoming, I think, in 1832, the honorary secretary of the British Jewish Committee. And Jacob Borges de Silva was the president. In 1835, Judith and Moses Montefiore, Sir Montefiore, visited Malta, finding only 5 Jewish families at that point in time. By the year 1846, the community was large enough to invite Joseph Tajar from Tripoli to become the first rabbi since 1492. Absolutely staggering. I think we mentioned him in the series. The synagogue initially in Tajar residence at 155 Strada Real, Valletta, later moved to Spur Street, or the 9 Strada Speron. Following the revolutions in the year 1848, several impoverished Jewish families from Hungary, France and Germany found refuge in Malta. To cater for their needs, the community appealed to the Pidyon and to the Rabbinic of London. A report from 1851 notes that the community was led by Jacob Abiasis, Raphael Bismot and Ricardo Pariente. They were the wealthiest families, were the Borges de Silva and the Sonnino, I believe. Many Jews were occupied in commerce over there, of finance, as agents and brokers, while others were shopkeepers and traders, it was reported over. In 1863, the famous Sion Attias became the new rabbi after the death of Joseph Tajar, or Joseph Tajar, you could say. Rabbi Fraji Nimni followed in the year 1878, and 1881 report noted 79 British Jewish residents, 48 Ottomans, 9 Italians, 4 Portuguese, 3 Tunisians and 2 Germans. In 1890s, with the backing of the Archbishop, Bishopric, a pamphlet was published which recast, unfortunately, the blood libel against the Jews. The policy quickly intervened to ban it. The Jewish community remained very small, and in some periods did not have a rabbi. Now, it's actually interesting. The Moroccan-born, Portugal-raised Rabbi Nissim Ohayon was appointed as the last rabbi in 1934, serving until the years 1956 for a staggering 22-year period at that point in time. Now, I think in the years of the World War II, several Jews fleeing Nazism came to Malta, particularly from Austria, the Edo family, from Italy, and from Libya. I think the Reggiano family. Numerous Maltese Jews at that point in time fought in the British Army during the war. Now, I think it was from the years 1915 to 1944, the Jewish community was led by someone, Achille Taya. He was succeeded by Fortunato Habib in 1944 to 1963, George Taya in 1963 to 1994, and then by Abraham Hayim Ohayon, the son of Rabbi Nissim Ohayon. Very interesting. In 1953, it was the World Jewish Congress counted 56 Jews in Malta, represented in the Jewish community of Malta, led by Fortuna Habib, with George D. Taya as the secretary. Now, the guide states that the representation of the community is recognized by the government. Its 5-man working committee is elected by the membership, and efforts were made, I think, at that point in time to arrange for Jewish and religious instruction. I think in 2019, the Jewish community in Malta gathered around 150 people, slightly more than 120, of which 80 were active, and mostly were elderly, I think, at that point in time. Many among the newer generations decided to settle abroad, including England, Israel. Most Maltese Jews were Sephardi. However, I think there was still Ashkenazim over there. Maltese Jews found themselves without a synagogue when the building in Spur Street was demolished in the year 1979. I believe in 1984 a new synagogue was opened at 182 Strada San Orosolo, but had closed down in 1995 as the building was collapsing. In 2000, new synagogue was built in Ta Sibix with donations, I think at that point in time, from the United States and United Kingdom. The Jewish Foundation of Malta manages, I think, it now with the Jewish centers reported over. The relations with Israel have been friendly, I think, since former independence. A direct flight from Tel Aviv brings around 300 tourists to Malta each time. Very interesting now. Some more. I think in 2013 there was a Chabad Jewish Center in Malta. It was founded by Rabbi Chaim Shalom Siegel and his wife, Rabbinit Haya Moshe Siegel. The deported over. Let's speak a bit more about Fortunato Habib. He was between 1885 to 1963. He was born in Tripoli. He was son of Abraham Habib, the chief rabbi of Benghazi and Tripoli. He moved to Malta in his 20s, soon to start a successful trade in sugar, coffee and olive oil. Habib established the Lafayette House in Zakari Street in Valletta, and upon the franchise of Paris Galeries Lafayette, dealing in ready-made ladies' fashion, the first such shop in Malta, later expanding the Britannia Street and the Tower Road Cinema, I think at that point in time. He is credited to have introduced cinema in Malta and to have created the first recordings of Maltese folk music in 1931, when he accompanied local folk singers, including Issa Mensa and Liksudi to Tunis. 15 titles were recorded there for the German Polyphone label and sold in Malta and to the Maltese communities in Tunis, Alexandria and other places also. I think he's remembered for having helped several other Jewish refugee families, including Eder, settled Malta during and after the war. He rests, I think, at the Jewish cemetery at Calcara. Now, another famous, the Hamus and Hannah Regininia moved to Malta, where he worked as a tailor from Italian Libya following the 1938 race laws. Hamas died in 1941, and his son Manasseh was killed in 1942 during the bombing of the Regent Cinema in Valletta. Their other sons and grandchildren remained in Malta deported over. And other famous families, Hirsch Sherman and Helen Erter, moved from Vienna with their children to Malta in 1938, is reported over. With the start of the war, they were interred with other German, Austrian and Italian citizens. They were released after 3 months. Now, following year, they were interned again in the old Covenant of Rabat. Once released a year later, and they found their hat factory in Mista had been destroyed by Nazi bombing. Afterward, they slowly built a chain of 5 clothing outlets, Harrow, which were quite popular. Among, let's just say, the first of them, I think at that point in time. They also owned the Leroy Hotel in Quercia, and much can be said within regards to that. The more, I think another prominent family from Malta happened to be the Marco and Clara Arroyo. They arrived in Malta, I think in 1930s from Bulgaria. They ran a Swiss house, textile shop in Britannia, I think, Valletta in 60s and 70s, before moving to the United Kingdom in 1988. Their son Dorian was an accompanied pianist. Another son, Robert, moved to the UK and later to Israel. And his wife, I think Preeti, their 2 sons were killed, unfortunately, in a bomb attack in Gaza in the year 1971. Of Ondina, who worked at the Kingsway Pharmacy, and Margaret Taylor in 1960s and 1970s run Taylor Sportex and Tweed textile shop in Palace Square, Valletta. Now it's actually interesting. George and Gita Taylor were among prominent family. The George Taylor was a big shareholder in Marks and Spencer's. Introduced it to Malta with Bertie Mizzi. Very interesting. That's another interesting tidbit. Jewish cemeteries in Malta include the Calcara Cemetery, which was, I think, in the year 1784 to 1833. The Tabraxia Cemetery, this was in 1836 to 1891. And the Marsa Jewish Cemetery opened, I think, in the year 1887. That's very interesting. I think in 1372, King Frederick II granted a piece of land at Tabia, interesting enough, to the University Judaism, the Jewish community, for use as cemetery. A Hebrew language tombstone found on site was dedicated to Rachel, the spouse of, very interesting enough. I'm not going to speak much about that. Okay, a Jewish cemetery was established in Calcara in 1784 by Legon Fund for ransoming Hebrew slaves at its own expense. I'm just reading notes here, I think, from Wikipedia. For the burial of the dead of its race. And there's other burial spots we're not going to go too much into. I think there was the Tabraxia Cemetery, and a Jewish cemetery in Marsa was built in 1879, I believe, also, thanks to donations from Jewish English Sir Moses Montefiore. Well, we spoke about him already. Now, more can be said about them. I think Jews from Turkey and other places who were captured by the Hospitaller Knights that ruled in the island in 1530 till 1798 were unable to redeem them, establish a new Jewish community in Malta. The island became open to unimpaired settlement of Jews, and Napoleon conquered it, expelled the Knights in 1798 as before, during the British rule on the island, which began with the expulsion of the French in 1800. There began a limited immigration of Jews to Malta, but the community never numbered more than several dozen, and there wasn't always a rabbi over that point in time. I think there were 3 Jewish cemeteries in Malta, which was visited through prior arrangements with local Jewish community leaders. And the stories actually gleaned, let's say, from the tombstone inscriptions, which has to be reported over. A rich narrative which includes Jewish soldiers who fought in World War I were buried in Malta. Just to add more information, I think in 1979, the old synagogue of community in capital city Valletta was destroyed, as we mentioned before. In 2000, a new synagogue was dedicated. I think there's about 250 Jews today, under present Mr. Reuben Ochayon, and the rabbi of the community, Rabbi Chaim Shalom Siegel, who we mentioned about before. In 2013, obviously, the Kollel Center, the Chabad Center, was established. And I think there's, including El Chaim, the only strict kosher restaurant in all of Malta. The Chabad Foundation, along with, let's say, local Jewish community, worked to strengthen. Now, the famous visitors, there was many famous visitors we mentioned at the beginning. Rabbi Abram ben Shmuel Abrolafia, who was one of them. I think he was born in Saragossa in 1240, mentioned by him before. I think on the day between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish Union of 5040 in 1280, he set out to convene Pope Nicholas III to heed his ideas and ease suffering of Jews, which was highly reported over. Medina was a place that seemed to have harbored an important Jewish community until the expulsion edict of 1492. When the Normans seized archipelago in 1090, there was a mixed population in the islands consisting of Muslims, Christians and Jews. From 1091, the Jewish community in Malta's history integrated with nearby Sicily, which was traced, I think, obviously from 1240 and so on and so forth. And populated code of the Middle East migrated to Malta and established business concerns. Azerbaijan, Ragusa, Tunis, Tripoli, as we said before. 1998, the Maltese Jewish families who identified themselves as Sephardim, obviously from Spain or as against Ashkenazim, come from Eastern Europe, do not exceed about 30 families, reduced sometimes to 1 or 2 individuals, generally old. Most of the polypotes speaking several languages. The Ashkenazim are people installed here for a few years, the time of a contract with a multinational. Some are refugees, Lebanese Jews, factory owners, tradesmen, British pensioners. They meet once a month for the celebration of Shabbat there, and 14 or 20 men. Very interesting. I think Malta's Jews bring in a shochet, mohel from Jerusalem, and when a boy is born in the community, a mohel is brought from Rome. So it's just a few insights of the history of the Maltese Jewish community. I thought it would be a special edition over here, as we just spoke about the Kosovan community just in the last few hours. Also, I thought we'll do one on the Maltese Jewish community, explore to the different rabbis were and this community itself. I'd love to, it would be nice to visit Malta at one stage, to visit. I think that's always welcome. I'm just requesting a favour of everyone, please subscribe to the channel. We're nearing at the moment a staggering 7,000 subscribers, so please subscribe. We are covering videos on the history of great rabbis from Sephardic countries, mostly Ottoman countries, North Africa. If you please watch over the videos we've got large playlists of great rabbis over here in this series, and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a well and fantastic day. Thank you everyone for watching.